the entrance to her videos is like a bunch of like crazy high notes. Like they're beautiful, but it's also like, it's perfectly Mariah, right?
Ladies and gentlemen, Mariah Carey.
This breathy stuff is actually, it takes a lot of precision to do breathiness intentionally. There are two instances where the vocal folds will let air escape. One is if you're blowing them open and they can't adduct and there's just too much air pressure. And that's like the bad version of falsetto that everyone hates. But if you're doing it in the low, let me bring up this. And not that window. Actually takes a lot of finesse and control. So if I go that's pretty low for me. Ooh, right. If I do this, that's a mistake. So it's actually really tough. So this this waveform, you see how that turns big, like really, really suddenly? That's the problem with trying to do breathiness on the low. You have this inconsistency. So the reason why the folds come together is called the Bernoulli effect. If you took two pieces of paper and you blow through it, you're changing the air pressure, nature abhors a vacuum, boom, papers come together. That's all you need to know. Air through papers, boom. Same thing, focal folds. Air through folds, boom, they come together. So to do breathy on a low, you need to be incredibly precise and gentle. I can do it higher. No, not today. It's tough. I've been doing this for 14 years, and it's tough. It's a hard thing to do. Ideally, you want what's called a aspirate onset, or aspirate gradual. It would sound like this. I'm not going to do it with the aspirate, but that's what you want to be able to do, starting from there. That's a mistake right here. But you see how gradual that is? You need to be able to be that gradual without adducting your folds. And that's really hard in the low range, specifically. And the reason why it's hard to do in the low range is because your folds are literally fatter. And low notes take more air, fundamentally. So it's double the challenge. Imagine that even if she didn't, she's just like a superhuman singer. So, you know, like... You hear that hiss at the end there? It's coming in and out, and it's intentional. That little leak there is a wonderful aesthetic. That's the vocal folds not being all the way together. And before anyone comes in with saying that's a matter of the VHS, if it were the VHS quality, you would hear the sizzle throughout, and you don't. Okay, so we were talking about the folds not being completely closed on the low end, right? Takes a tremendous amount of control. Then she's doing that, just a little bit of adduction on the low, and then she does a run. I can't even begin to explain how preposterously difficult. Like, it's one thing to do a run. Runs are best done with thin folds. Thinner folds move quicker, right? There's literally less to move. To be able to adduct like that, just partially adduct the folds to get this breathy tone, and then do all of these shenanigans, means that consistently she has to maintain only a little bit of adduction. Then she goes right into full adduction of the folds. right? There's full adduction here. The air leak is gone. And she's bringing it in and out, and it's so cool. What I love about Mariah is that there's nothing pretentious about her delivery, and everything she does is subtle. And you might think, well, the whistle notes are not subtle. And I would argue that the only reason they're not subtle, whistle notes is because they're jarring, because not many people can do them. So when we hear a whistle note, it's something we're like, oh, whoa, we didn't expect that coming. But in the instance of Mariah, you do. And so that's why I say she's never bringing attention to her technique. It's so clean. Like, I love this. So this little grind right here also takes extraordinarily little air. So if it's like Becky in California, right? It takes an extremely little amount of air, less air even than these breathy low notes. So she goes from partially adducted to this little growl here, this little grapple. It's just for like a short second, and then the folds come together fully. And like, unless I were here to tell you, or unless we had a spectrogram on this performance, which is just like a highlighting of all the frequencies and like their volumes, etc. It would be hard to know. It would be hard to know that she's doing all of this right off the bat. It's so cool. I love her mic technique. That's just so darn good. So what she's doing here is she's using, she's bringing the mic closer when she goes to her lows, which makes sense for two reasons. One, if you're closer, the sound source is closer and therefore affects how much volume there is, right? But also you're going to boost the lower frequencies if you go up close. And actually, when I demonstrate this, I never remove the equalization. So let me demonstrate. All right, this is without any EQ, and you're going to hear every bit of low. You see how that low comes in really, really dramatically? There we go. That's unfiltered loudness and how the lows boost. I can only imagine that there's an EQ on the microphone, but the concept still remains the same. You're closer to the mic, lower frequencies get boosted. Then for this, and I'm sorry I stopped so much, but like, it's the reason why is because she's doing so much. So there's a proximity effect here on the low. And then she did pursed lips on the low, which further emphasizes lower notes in the same way that your like trombone does. The extension of the vocal tract will highlight lower frequencies in the same way that a cello highlights lower frequencies than a violin, right? So by pursing your lips and bringing it forward, you get more volume. Second, what she's doing here is then she's then retracting her lips, which will brighten the sound. Glottals. Oh, man. So already, like, she was, even when she was doing this, I didn't stop to point out, like, she's returning, like, all the breathy stuff. Like, so I would say that the complexity of anything is when the fundamentals intersect, right? Breathy, that's one element. And she brings it out crazy. Vocal runs, that's another element, but she's using both of them together. Breathy, vocal runs, mic technique, and vowels, all at the same time. Now, can other singers do that? Yes. But it's still impressive. And then on top of this, So, high notes take less air. And if you do a glottal is when your folds are just stuck together. You're not making them move. And you can actually do this right here, right now, at any level of skill. Just hold your breath, and then sing as you're trying to hold your breath. You hear that little, like, kind of like weird little, like, thing that happens, right? It's like a different way to start a note clearly, right? So what's happening, the folds are closed, and then you kind of push them open with air. So if you don't do this carefully, you get kind of a weird poppy sound that you just heard from me doing it. But she uses it as a way to really give emphasis at the start of another note. So she's using it for phrasing purposes right here. That's the glottal. And then she also goes into breathy from this. So glottal, intentional closing of the folds, forcing them open, and then being able to get to a point again with these breathy tones where there's only partial adduction of the folds. It's brilliant. And it's just like, it's a lot of larynx and vocal folds gymnastics. And specifically, because I think it might be weird for some people to know this, she's not manipulating the folds necessarily. What she's doing is she's using breath to do all of this, because that's really how it works. So this is all breath control. All of it. So now she's applying what happened on the low into the high. So when you're singing high notes, the the thing about falsetto that makes people think it's a pejorative is the lack of ability to do anything else as people ascend. When you go and do falsetto, what happens, well, in the bad falsetto, is that your folds will blow open. Eight teal things, that little bit of fuzz, that's actually the sound of air leaking. So what people think of as head voice or mixed voice would be this. But if you're singing in full voice and you're going up higher, you should not see this, because it means you will not go much higher than that, because your folds will blow open from the breath pressure. So that's the not good falsetto. That is only not good because people don't have control over it. That's not what Mariah is doing. That much is true, that's happening. You can hear it, right? It's literally, boom, there's kind of a poppy sound to that. But it's how she comes off of it that makes it really cool, because it shows that not only can she pop her folds open for a desired effect, but she can come right in with perfectly closed folds. There's so much here. There's so much here. So, okay, let's talk about her onsets here at the beginning of notes. That is an aspirate abrupt. An aspirate is h. So an aspirate abrupt is ha, right? The folds come together after the H sound. That little growl. She goes from a very, very, very much a lot of volume, you know? That little growl, that little tiny growl thing, that is like the Becky, that's California Becky. That takes very little air. So she is, like, we're 1 minute and 16 in, and her breath is ridiculous. Like, all of these things that we've talked about so far are all done by having like disturbingly high level of ability with breath management and control. And one of the things that you can do when you have that much breath control is you can do risky things that would be risky for other people. Listen to this higher note that she has here. The show. Those are the false folds coming together. Now, don't do this very high, but you can actually do this yourself on a lower note. So I'm going to go here. Hold your breath. And then as you blow the folds up and very gently, keep trying to kind of hold it a little bit. What that sound is, that little shake that's there, that's the false folds kind of shaking and coming together. When you do that, it becomes very, very, very difficult to go higher. It is not at all efficient, right? But if you're ridiculously good, you can use that for expressiveness, right? You can use the effect. So we're not talking about right and wrong. We're talking about cause and effect here. So someone who's a new student who doesn't have the ability to control the false folds, I would advise them to not do that. But if you're really good, you can do this. I love it. I want to talk about her sense of timing, her rhythm. Recording artists who were around in the 90s are usually way better with two things: rhythm and mic technique. Back in the 90s, when audio was done analog, no digital, anytime you wanted to make an adjustment, you would have to mess with the actual tape of the recording. Physical tape. I'm old. I remember having my first cassette. But for those of you who are youngins, if the audio engineer has to clip up a bunch of tape and do a bunch of crazy physical things for literally every part of it, that's going to be extremely expensive. So much so that labels never signed anybody who couldn't actually sing. It was only when digital came around where that could change. So everything in the 90s and prior, during analog recording, almost all of it had to be done on the way in. So that's why her mic technique is amazing, and that's why her sense of time is amazing. Nowadays, you can cut up a waveform and make everything in time. I know because I do it. If you do overdubs, which is something that she did a lot of on her albums, and overdub is basically just sing on top of the thing, right? It's add the thing. Sing another thing at the same time that the other thing was recorded, right? That's what an overdub is. So when she's doing that, her sense of time has to be amazing because, right, like we said, everything has to be done on the way in. So listen to her being on the offbeat. Tap your fingers or your feet along with these backup singers. She's hitting notes on the offbeat, on the onbeat, and using different rhythms in this particular run to make it more interesting. An amateur thinks a run is a bunch of notes. A real musician will treat it as a phrase. I know we're getting to the good part. Well, not to the good part. The whole thing is amazing, but right to like the most epic, right? The 2/3 mark or the golden ratio, right? I want to talk about vowel modification here. Draps, right? She brightens it for effect. And then again, more of this control over the breathiness sound, right? How close the folds are together. The tuning between her and the backup singers is divine. Listen to how clean this is. You hear them all together? That's magic. And again, more of this false fold contraction thing. More of these glottals again. It's not just glottals though. It's, hold on, let me hear it again. Okay, so those are not glottals, those are aspirate abrupts. So we've already talked about those. Ha, right, ha, ha, where you throw in a lot of air and then all of a sudden, boom, your folds close really quickly. But what's cool is that she's, in order to accomplish it in this run, she's doing all sorts of things with her vocal folds, which again is just kind of a matter of breath control. So she is blowing her folds open with a lot of air on the aspirates. And it's important to note that she doesn't do that on the high note, because high notes take less air, especially when you have like a gritty effect like she's just doing right here. Right? A little bit of that false fold contraction we were talking about earlier to get that kind of rattle. False folds can rattle all they want. Real folds, not a good idea. So these are, they're not arbitrary, right? She's using them for musical effect. Again, I want to hear it one more time because I want you to hear how on time it is. When you do an aspirate abrupt, it's actually hard to get the abrupt right on time. It's difficult because what you're starting the note with is h. So if you're thinking like on the beat and you're like ha, right? It's going to come a little bit later on the beat, but that's not what she does. She's ahead of the beat just a little bit in order to accomplish this. So technically pretty intelligent, musically brilliant. Like you can, she's right on top of the drum at the same time. It's crazy. Again, vowels. So Rochelle Farrell is sort of the queen of doing crazy things with vowels. But here is a great lesson in what we can do just with our face holes, just with our mouth. The brightness of that in the low allows the low to be more audible. She's giving this low realness. So she's going lower at the beginnings and ends of the phrases, which is, you know, a good place to start and end. And she's still using the proximity effect so that the low notes are there, but not getting buried by everything else. Here, she does the opposite of that, and it gives us this epicness on the lower notes. And then using not bright vowels. You can hear dramatic differences here. I love her belts. Mariah's one of, I shouldn't say one of, I should say that there are many singers who can only belt or can only sing classically. Mariah has all those options and more. The reason this is so impressive is because when you go from low to high, you need to understand the high note that you're singing, because if you start with too much adduction of the folds, thickness of the folds, it is really hard to thin them after the fact. It's doable, but it's extremely difficult. And she's going up basically her entire, like her low range all the way up to her belt range, or at least the higher end of her belt range. And huge asterisks, right? Because when we talk about Mariah Carey and range, like, you know, we're talking the entire piano basically. So this slide up here, the low note is more quiet, thinner folds. What's hard here though is she's using a consonant that is reliant on building up air pressure. K, k, right? If you do a k, there's this period of time where it's building up air pressure. This matters because, again, the thickness of the folds is directly correlated with how much air you're using. You cannot belt with too much air. You're just going to hurt yourself. And you can't hit high notes with too much air either. So to go from a consonant that is reliant on building up air pressure when you don't want it, the way that she gets away with this after the consonant is what she's been doing so frequently in this performance, which is an aspirate abrupt. So this k sound is as gentle as her h sound was. There are folks who, like, whenever I make a Mariah video, they comment like she's a superhuman. I would argue that she is just like the same as a multiple-time gold medalist, right? Like, there might be physical attributes that give her some advantage, but it's intricate little things like this. Because it's one thing to point them out. It's one thing to give someone an exercise to accomplish this and to do it. But she has it on lock, right? These are things that, like, if you hit that C or that K too hard, you're just not going to be able to go up. So, like, that applies for her as well. So she just, like, doesn't make it a problem, right? She understands that and she adjusts for it. She is a human being. She's just, like, superhuman, right? There's nothing, she's not working with different parts, not wildly different parts anyway. She's working with the same stuff that most of us are born with. She just uses it infinitely better than I don't want to say all people, but basically,